Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're coming from. We are glad that you could join us for today's MEI webinar, Enhance Your Creativity Through Poetry. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Grateful to see 96 from 24 countries sign up for today's webinar. Special welcome to those of you who are joining an MEI webinar for the first time. And if this is you, please use the chat to say, yes, this is my first time. We'll be glad to see who are among our participants are joining us for the first time. This is Ramon Rocha of Media Associates International, or MAI. MAI is here to help equip and encourage global Christian writers and publishers to create life-transforming materials in their heart language and in their local context, that these publications will help strengthen the church and impact society. We encourage you to interact with us and with each other by using the chat for your comments and the Q&A for your questions. This 1-hour webinar is being recorded, and we will send you the link to the recorded version within today. Today, we are so privileged to have Akolo Anthony James as our speaker. Friends and colleagues call him Tony. Is that okay to call you Tony? Tony?
Very okay, Ramon.
Yes.
It's fine.
May I request you to please share the background behind the name Akolo, what it means?
Okay, so greetings from here. Akolo actually means, as a matter of fact, it's pronounced Aklo.
Aklo.
But yes, and it means love.
It means love.
Name, yes, from the Egon ethnic group of Nigeria, somewhere in the middle belt of Nigeria, from Nasarawa State specifically. So Aklo means love.
Wow, what a wonderful name. What a lovely name.
Thank you very much, Ramon.
So Tony is an in-house editor at Africa Christian Textbooks in Jos, Nigeria. He is a playwright, poet, and researcher. He's the author of Give Up on the Things That Hold Down, and is currently preparing an anthology of poems titled Hope, Not Deferred, set for release later this year. And I heard from John Moss, the president of MAI, that Tony captivated the Lit Africa delegates last October in Botswana with his poetry. So Tony, thank you for your time and your preparations to lead us in our webinar today. Enhance your creativity through poetry. And we are eager to be encouraged by you. So please take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Ramon. Thank you, everyone who is attending this webinar. I would like to just say thank you to Media Associates International. I also like to thank the Africa Christian Textbooks family. Some of them have joined this webinar. I would like to thank the Media Associate Africa, especially Rose and Joanne, with whom we've been in touch. I'd like to thank some members of the Innovation Hub and everyone who has attended this. So today I'll be taking us on a webinar, and I will just share my screen so we can begin right away. So if you can see my screen, send a comment in the chat to let me know you can see my screen. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I'll be talking about enhance your creativity through poetry. I've been introduced. My name is Akolo Anthony James. Now, I'd like to just ask, whenever we talk, well, let us pray. Lord, we thank you for this webinar. We thank you for bringing us together. We thank you for helping us to do this right. Father, give us the strength, the knowledge, and the wisdom to take this through. In Jesus' name, amen. The purpose of this webinar will be to help Christian writers, or to help you enhance your skill in creative writing, particularly when addressing particular life issues for a broader audience. That's the purpose of this webinar. So one thing I want to let us know is you do not need to be a poet or an aspiring poet to benefit from this. If you're a writer or someone who aspires to be a writer, I think that this webinar is for you, because learning poetic devices is going to help enhance your writing in special ways that I will share shortly. There are specific objectives to this, and one of them is the first one is to define poetry. Secondly, we're going to highlight the benefits of writing poetry and reading poetry. Then we're going to explain some steps in writing poetry. Then I'm going to show how poetry can make our writing more creative. And then I'll outline some demerits of using poetic devices. Now let's begin. Whenever we talk about poetry, what comes to your mind? I would like to see some comments in the session. When we talk about poetry, what comes to your mind? Please send in your comments and let me know.
You can use the chat.
You can use the chat to send in the comments. So once we talk about poetry, what comes to mind? Metaphors. That's from Celia Maron. I hope I'm pronouncing it well. Thank you, Celia. Yeah, so more rhythm. Thank you very much, Philip. Thoughts about life and being alive. That's Yegung Che. I hope I got that right. Lillian says arts. Figures of speech from Joanne. New dimensions of thinking from Theresa Siemens. Beautiful contributions. Songs. I'm not sure what DV means, but songs. Okay, then okay, that's the initials for the name. Okay. So thank you very much. Songs, all these are right. What we've said are completely correct. They define an aspect of poetry. Now, here is one definition that I believe captures what I know poetry to be, and I got this from Britannica.com. It says it is literature that evokes a concentrated imaginative awareness of experience or a specific emotional response through language, chosen and arranged for its meaning, sound, rhythm. Now, if you look at this definition, I underline some keywords. I underline emotional response. I underline meaning. I underline sound. I underline rhythm. Why I chose to underline this is because those are the aspects of poetic devices that, if artfully and creatively deployed into popular writing, can truly help us to enhance our creativity in writing. Now, emotional response. Poetry is emotional, right? And then meaning, it just says that every poem has a message. Then sound and rhythm simply implies that poetry is somewhat musical. I mean, it has some musicality attached to it. And that's why songs are a form of poetry. But poetry transcends songs. I personally have some background in music because I play the guitar and I play the piano, and the instruments have helped me to write poetry very well. So that's the definition of poetry. Poetry has certain characteristics. There are lots of them, but I'll just like to limit these characteristics to these 5 points. Number one is it has form and structure. So standard poems are usually written in lines, stanzas, and verses. Then we have imagery. Most poems, if not all, evoke imaginative awareness. It means it helps you to imagine things. By mere reading words, you can imagine things. So for instance, if I say he is as black as night, I try to make you imagine what night is and what this person, you try to just envision how black that this person can be, right? So, and then we have, it has emotion and tone. Every poem has its emotion and tone. For instance, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, it's a happy poem written for kids. The emotion is happy, and then the tone is quite playful. Now, every poem has that aspect. Then sound devices. Most poems or some poems have certain poetic devices that make it sound musical. For instance, rhyme. If I say something like, I'm coming to deliver some kind of a relief, this is never to maneuver because I am no deceiver. That's rhyme. And it gives this musicality to your work. And it can also help, other devices like alliteration can help bring the musicality. And then we have onomatopoeia. These are all aspects of poems that make it sound like music. Then poems are generally figurative, as some of us have rightly inserted in the charts, right? They are figurative and they have poetic devices. Now, I'll just like to quickly draw out some difference between popular writing and poetry. Popular writing and poetry. So when one is doing popular writing, like how to cook, I'm from Nigeria, so let me say you want to tell people how to cook jollof rice, right? It's popular writing. One is it's rational. Two is you will be objective to tell people this is how to cook rice. How to cook rice is simply how to cook rice. Then it will have technical terms like use seasoning, cooking pots, frying pans. Those are technical terms. That's popular writing. Now, not all popular writings are necessarily rational, objective, or technical, right? But that is on a broader sense. On the other hand, poetry is emotional. It is subjective. It uses commonplace words, no technical terms. So these are some of the difference. It can overlap here and there, but just for this webinar, I'll just like to highlight some differences for us to watch out for. Now, let me ask us something. You can drop your response on the chat room. If you set out to write something that looks like a poem, what will be the first thing you will do? So I'd like to get some comments and some responses. Let's say you set out to write a poem. What will first come to your mind? Or what is it that first comes to mind? An image. Thanks. That's Chi. Yeah, an image comes to mind. I'm waiting for more responses. A topic. Thank you, Joanne. Emotions. That's Dorothy. Theresa says nature and feelings. Well done. Thanks a lot. Right? A word that leads to another word. A word that leads to another word. Thank you. A word, a scene. Thank you very much. These are all true. When writing poems, when one sets out to write a poem, there is always a first step. That takes us to our next session of this webinar, which says steps to writing poetry and finding your voice as a poet. That is for those of us here who might be inspired to want to write poems in the future, right? Now, the number one, I'd like us to note, sorry, my Okay, I'd like us to note that first, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to writing poetry. If you checked in our comparison between poetry and popular writing, one of the things we said was that poetry is subjective. So it means it's personal. So there is no one size fits all. You can't say this is how one must write poetry. No. Then poetry is usually personal or personalized. It is humane and emotional. We should note this. So by personal, it means it can be your personal experience, something you've experienced firsthand. But when it's personalized, poetry can just mean that it's someone else's experience that you've decided to narrate through your own lens. So it is humane and emotional. Now, another thing to note before we go into steps of writing poetry is do not freeze or fixate on writing poetry the right way. If there is a liberal form of writing, or if there is a liberal form of writing, then it's poetry because of what we call poetic license. In literature, there's what we call poetic license, and poets use that a lot. It means just do it your way. Do what will bring out your message the most, right? So there is actually, if you start fixating, okay, there is a right way to start this, you may not start at all. Then what I will share as the steps, it's not one size fits all. It is my own process of how I write poems. It is my own process of how I incorporate poems into my own popular writing. So I'm not saying that this is the general process that everyone uses. It's my own process, and I'll just be sharing those with you, and I hope it inspires someone. Now, step number one, I would like to say is read excellent and edifying works of others, right? Now, there are many garbage in, garbage out poems out there. It's as Christians, we must guard our hearts and our minds. That's true. So it's important that we select excellent Christian poets as well as excellent secular poets whose works do not contradict the truth of Scripture. So that's the first step. For me, I read a lot before I write something. So I read wide, I read excellent works that just helps me see how people have written, and that inspires me, and that kind of gives me direction on how to start. So first step is read excellent and edifying works of others. Second step is capture your thoughts. You see, like we've said, poetry is emotional, and emotions can be fleeting. Emotions can be fleeting. What I mean by that is you may feel something right now and you feel so deeply about it. If you do not capture that emotion immediately, you may lose it immediately. And then you try to look, you might remember the words, you might remember the content, you might remember what you were thinking about, but to capture that as you did, it's always very difficult. To capture the emotion, it's difficult. It just flies away. So because of that, if you want to scribble out poems here and there, you ought to have a writing device handy. It is a crime to oneself to always lose inspiration. There are times that I'm taking a walk and then an inspiration comes. I do not have a writing device or something to record it immediately. I get back to the house, I lose it, and I just feel like, Kai, this is unforgivable. But I end up forgiving myself anyway. And then the third point is have a storehouse to scribble thoughts in lines and verses. I call this bits and pieces. I have a document where I dump in bits and pieces. The moment I capture my thoughts, I do not just scatter them everywhere. I have a particular place where I drop random thoughts, right? I drop them there, and then in lines, in verses. Most of them are not complete thoughts. Most of them they just flash here and there. I do that a lot. So that's the first step. Next step is you should research and deploy the poetic devices where necessary. Now, based on what you want to achieve, such as humor, humor, if you want to achieve humor, irony or sarcasm works best. It's a poetic device that you should research. Sad emotions, you have simile, euphemism, emphasis, you have hyperbole, repetitions, musicality, you have rhyme, onomatopoeia. So you have to research poetic devices, learn about it. Not just that, also research how other poets use these devices. Now, the next thing, let me just share this experience. I was in my, we call it in Nigeria, JSS2. That's my second year in secondary school, or what some clients might call high school. And we went, it was a Catholic school, so we went to visit this parish and we got a lot of gifts. Prior to them, I had lots of scribblings, things I had scribbled, and then I wrote them on sheets of papers, and then they were in my choir files, and I belonged to the choir. So we were there, and then the bishop came and said he wanted the students who attended that particular program to just give a vote of thanks, to talk to the audience. And something just led our principal to call me, because I was a bit of a smaller stature and he wanted someone who can charm the audience. So I came out, but in those fleeting seconds, I had gone through my bits and pieces, and I remembered I wrote something that was quite incomplete, but that could pass as a speech. And immediately I was up there and I gave that presentation. I share this story to say this. We have to just keep writing. Not necessarily that, okay, we have a book project to complete or we have a collection of poems. One of the things that should characterize our lives as writers is we should keep writing day in, day out, with or without projects, with or without something on our table, right? Now, under this, I say, find your most creative and productive moments. I write best in the mornings. I write best in the nights. Those times are sacred for me. And it's just 1 hour, 2 hours every day. But at the end of the day, if you check what I call my file of bits and pieces, you have thousands and thousands of words of thoughts that I have scribbled, of incomplete, of unfinished poems, of unfinished essays and all that. They are just there. And somehow I have a bank to always withdraw from when I have serious writing to do. And that's, I've talked about, so regiment your writing to fall during those moments when it's productive. Do not be fixated on finding your voice. Usually people want to know what's unique to me. No, please just ensure that you keep writing. You don't have to find your voice immediately. If you write 1,000 poems or 1,000 essays, you'll find out that probably 90% will point towards something. That's probably your voice. So you find your voice by finding your voice, and that is by writing and writing. Now, do not hesitate to experiment. I experiment a lot, you know, I do what I call word play. I can just write a word and I'll be like, what follows this word? You know, I can write many random sentences and then I'll say, okay, let me connect these random sentences into a poem. So do not hesitate to experiment. Now, I'd like to say this. A lot of us, oh no, not a lot of us, a lot of writers box themselves too early into a corner. So before you try other things, you ask somebody and he says, well, I am a essayist. I am a popular writer. Too early we box ourselves. And that's why we do not try to explore other forms of writing. I think that as writers, we may have our areas of specialization, but boxing ourselves too early will limit us. There are other things we can really do. Some people here might just be good poets, but because we have boxed ourselves just trying to write one genre, we do not experiment. Now, when also we write other forms of writing on the background, it does something to what we are known for. It is a way of reinventing yourself over the years. So for instance, last year you tried your hands on writing stage plays, but we know you as a popular writer, and you tried your hands on writing stage plays, which is dialogue driven and all that. We may just find out that in the coming years, those stage plays you just attempted writing, even though they were not staged, might have influenced your dialogues, in your writing, and somehow something refreshing pops up in your writing. So do not box yourself too early. And that's why this webinar is important. I talked about, for those of us who want to be mainline poets, there is also the side of editing and improving your poems. But I understand that not all of us, we just want to know how poetry can influence us. So, but for those who want to be mainline poets, I tell them to edit the content of their work, to edit the style, to edit the structure, the grammar, and then share your poem with a sample target audience to test comprehension. We cannot assume that people will understand our work. And if people don't understand our work, of what meaning is it? So we have to always test our work against how our intended target audience would perceive it. So having said all this, let me quickly get our opinion. What do we think are the benefits of poetry, or how do we think poetry can benefit our writing? I'd like to get some comments. How do we think that poetry can benefit our writing? It doesn't matter your genre. Seeing, okay, help us write tight. Great, great. I've seen, this is Lisa. We learn to really condense our thoughts and feelings. Thanks, Joanne. More thoughts? I'd like to get more thoughts on this. How do we think poetry can help us? To think more deeply about word choice. Beautiful. Diction, it's important. It helps us to think more deeply. It helps us to explore our emotions and give voice to our experiences. It helps in introspection. Yes, that is a very wonderful one. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to proceed into talking about the benefits of writing poetry, and I would add of reading poetry. So one is that it makes our work more emotional. Like someone has rightly pointed, it makes our work more emotional. So let us look at this normal text. It says, I am currently feeling distressed and unable to focus clearly. That's the first statement, right? I am currently feeling distressed and unable to focus clearly. Now, here is how it may sound if we want to make it more emotional, and this has to do with poetic rendition. The rock upon my heart weighs like thorns. It crushes my thoughts to shattered pieces. This is more creatively written. It's not just a statement of facts. It can describe the extent to which you are distressed and to which you are able not to, to which you are unable to focus. You see that? So it makes our work more emotional. Now, because this is a more majorly a Christian audience, we will have to talk about how poetry can help us communicate spiritual truths. The Bible has lots of sections that have to do with poetry. Some of our hymns during worship is poetry. Some parts of our liturgies are often given life by poetry. The Psalms and many other parts of the Bible, which have become templates for prayers, are poetry. In the same vein, we can use poems to talk about spiritual truths in our work, to insert prayers. One example I've always loved is Joanne Campbell's devotional that I got. She's following. I saw that her prayers were written in such a poetic format that you can pray it out. For instance, the Lord's Prayer sounds more poetic to me because it falls into a rhythm. I remember when we were in school, we learned it by singing it. If you give this tap, you hear, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. You find out that there is a rhythm to it. So you see, it helps communicate spiritual truths. Poetry can help us to form imagery in our work. Now let us look at these examples. Number one says, he came in, smiling at everyone, and greeted them. Initially, they were cold, but his cheerfulness soon made them like him. That is a normal text. If we want to put in some poetic element to this, it may sound something like this. His smile was as bright as the rising sun, and the people he was coming to see were as cold as ice. But when he greeted them, many hearts melted, and soon everyone became fond of him. Now, if you read this, you'll find out that it sounds rhythmic. There is a musicality attached to this, right? Not just that, there is also the imagery such that we can see his smile and compare it to the rising sun. We can compare how cold those people were. These are all poetic devices, right? It helps us form imagery. Next, it helps you add rhythm to your writing. I have another example that says, many things are wonderful, many things are beautiful, but of all, love stands out once we know what it's about. This is, I picked this out from one of my scribblings, and I realized that you can insert this as a text, or you can transpose it into a text just to give it the music that can enhance your writing. You see, it's the same thing there, but written in a straight text format and not in verses. It encourages experimentation, leading to new thoughts, styles, and innovation. Now, during the Lead Africa in Botswana, I met John Most and we just got talking, and I told him I'm a poet. And he said, well, would like to just hear some of your works. And I said, you know what, John, I can sit in the audience and just listen to the different talks given by people. And then I can just write out those thoughts in poems, as poems. And then he said, whoa, that would be nice. And at the end of the day, we came out with about maybe 6 poems, and we presented 2. And from there, it's this experiment that is leading to the publication of my next book, which is titled Hope Not Deferred. It will be out in the coming months, published by Africa Christian Textbooks. You see that? So poetry helps it helps you just to, it leads to new thoughts, styles, and innovation, right? And then it helps you connect with your readers on a deeper level. That's the emotional aspect, the rhythmic aspect, the musicality, and all. Then it helps take your audience on a journey. If your writing has some poetic devices, it can just help to take your audience on a journey. One, you can connect emotionally with your audiences. You can take them along on a journey, right? So having said that, we're going to do just 3 minutes exercise. So we can show practical illustrations of how poetry can enhance our creativity in writing. So can we take 20 seconds to read this? 20 seconds to read this. And once you finish reading it, type in your thoughts about this text on or in the chat box. So what do we think about this writing? You can talk about its message, whatever that comes to your mind. 20 minutes, 20 seconds, sorry. Let's read this. All right, let's proceed. I got some comments, of which just we have one that says it's slightly boring. Lorena says it's very wordy. CX says it's informative and instructional. And then someone said it's textbook style. And then another person says it's dry, right? So let's look at our next texts. Let's take another 20 seconds to quickly brush through this poem. And then we can drop our comments or what we think. Invites participation, inspirational, inspiring, hopeful, exhorting, right? Great. Now, easy to read. Thank you. Now, can we see that it's the same message that both texts are trying to pass? So now let us take some time to read the following texts. Can we read this? And then let's get our feedback on these final texts. What do we think? So I see conversational, applicable to everyone, not just the academics, is didactic, although striving to be encouraging. Yeah, so I love the didactic, yeah. Okay, great. Plain talk. Thank you, Jacob. So you see that if we're going to be writing, if we're going to be writing for a popular audience, I think you see what has informed this other text, which is plain, simple, straight to the point, and it takes people on a journey, is the scribbling of the previous poem. And that's how one of the processes that works for me. Sometimes I look at some previous thoughts scribbled as poems to help me capture the emotion, to help me capture the rhythm, to help me capture some other things, and then I transpose them into text, and then I can just go further to edit and make it and compress it some more. It just helps my writing becomes more identifiable. That's a process that works for me. Now, I'll rush through the next illustration to say, this is a poem I wrote a long time ago. A friend indeed is a friend in need. And indeed, he prays to feed off your generosity and with some audacity. This was a simplistic, poetic scribbling I did that formed the opening dialogues of my most staged play, which is currently in Amazon. The play is titled And Vice Versa. It says, this is the dialogue. Open this door now. Bala replies, who could this be? Pam says, I said, open this door and let me in. And then Bala says, who might you be to dish out such commands? Pam says, will you open this door and stop blabbing? And then Bala said, could it be? No, certainly not a bandit. The caretakers assured me that this area is safe. Certainly not a bandit. And then look at the following dialogue, how it goes. I am not a bandit. Who are you then? A man indeed. A man indeed? Well, because I am a man in need. The musicality of this opening suddenly woke the audience. Every feedback I get, people are, it's music to their ears, and you easily capture the audience. But what had inspired this was the previous scribbling that you saw. And this was how I incorporated it into a stage play, and it gave life to it. Now, you can apply poetry first within your writing. It can be epigraphs, like the caption you write at the beginning of chapters. Then it can be interludes or inserts. Interlude means what you write in the middle of a work. For instance, if you're reading the Bible, you just get to a point where it says, and the children of Israel sang to the Lord. And then you see an interlude of poetry, and it breaks off from the narrative, and then it makes it more interesting. In your work, you can include poetry as those, right? Epigraph to just give that and all. So the importance of this is that it enhances the narrative, it provides additional context, it emphasizes a particular theme or idea. That's the importance of epigraphs and interludes and inserts. Some shortcomings of using poetic devices. Number one is it can shroud your message within figures of speech. Number two is it can be too emotional. Number three, it can a poet tends more towards compressing their words, especially people who write poems like in the genre of sonnets. They try to compress their work into as little words as possible. Paradoxically, lyrical and narrative poets can tend towards being verbose, and I'm one. I'm a lyrical and narrative poet, and sometimes it can just make my work to be a lot more verbose because I'm trying to put in figures of speech to make the work richer, right? So now, just to say something, I know there are some of us here who might not be, we are also writers, we're writers as well as preachers. Preachers can use performance poetry to drive home their message, right? So there is an aspect we call performance poetry. So if you're a preacher here, learning poetry and then learning how to perform them can help drive home your message. It can enhance your preaching. Just to say, that might be a topic for probably another session, but I just thought I should mention this here. Final thoughts and conclusion. Number one is have a storehouse of writing bits and pieces of your thoughts. And if possible, write them with the emotions they came and in lines and stanzas. That gives you the rhythm that they also came, that those inspiration came, right? It's important to do that because when transposing those thoughts into your writing, you are also deploying the emotion, then the musicality of the work, which makes your work to have some tonality. It's not just boring, but as people are reading, it's like music is playing in their ear and it's difficult to drop your book. Then they will shape your writing and they might form where you can draw upon for your epitaphs and interludes. Once you write these things, you can always look at those your thoughts and you may use them as epitaphs or interludes. Then finally, do not box yourself as a writer too early. Some of us here may not be poets, but it's important for us to understand that we can experiment with writing poetry. It will help us a great deal. We may not end up publishing it, but some of us, again, this might just be a drive towards reinventing oneself and try to say, okay, I could publish an anthology. So do not box yourself as a writer too early. Please experiment with various genres. And while we may know you for one thing or for a particular genre, you find out that it will add color to what you are writing and it will help to reinvent your style. Finally, questions, comments, and other thoughts.
Thank you so much, Tony. That's really a wonderful presentation. You have drawn us to the material and you have asked our comments and inputs, and it's really good. Yeah, one of the questions is, as you have encouraged us to make sure that we only read excellent poems, but how does one qualify what is an excellent poem? So, of course, you have to.
Well, I will speak for, let me just say how I select my poems, like excellent poems. One is classic poems. They are classic in the first place because they are excellent. So I read a lot of classic poems. I've read Williams Wordsworth. I've read Yeats. I've read our African poets, Wole Soyinka. I've read, so those poems have been celebrated over the years. That means they know they are good poems. And sometimes you just know there are, when you start, you may just read every kind of poem. But at the end of the day, as you read more and more poems, you are able to now tell, this is more excellent than this. So
okay.
That way.
So you have to expose yourself to as many. And as you read more, you'll be able to say, oh, this is really wonderful. This is really great. So, yeah. Joanne Campbell said, Tony, when you write, do you have your audience in mind, or are you just being true to what's on your heart?
Okay.
And how do you
Yeah.
balance this? Yeah.
Yeah. So I had mentioned that there is what we call personal writings, right? And there is what we call personalized writing. What I mean by that, it's my coinage. I don't know if it's existing somewhere else, but I'm not sure I've seen it. Personal writing simply is when you write something because you are trying to express yourself. In that case, you do not necessarily need to write with a target audience in mind. You're just writing to express yourself. But one thing we should know is most of the things we feel are not really peculiar to us. Things we're passing through, we should know that other people are also passing through similar experiences. That way, we have other people who might be passing through what we're passing through that made us write that poem in the first place. And when they read it, they're like, oh, that is me, right? So, but personalized poems, it's when you get commissioned to write for a particular audience, and then you have to like enter their shoes and know how they feel, and you write through their lens. That way, you already have a target audience, right? You already have a target audience. Now, let me come back to the personal poems. For personal poems, you must first identify what you are passing through or what the central message of that poem is. If, for instance, it's trying to talk about how God uplifted you, you might want to read or you might want to talk to other people and see if they have similar experiences. And then once they have such similar experiences, it means they can serve as your target audience. And that way you can begin to fine tune what was initially personal to cover a more diverse audience. I don't know if I've answered your question,
I think
Joanne.
that's a good answer. Thank you. Yes. Elizabeth said, this is a good one. I have learned that poetry can be used in preaching or as epitaphs or epigraphs. From Lorena, how do you know after revision and lots of revision that the poem is finished?
You know, there is what we call revision that even ends up boring you and boring. You talk down on yourself, you know, I call it over editing. When you want to get the perfectionist tendency that gets you frozen, or I don't know how to put it, right? So if it gets to a point where you feel satisfied with what you have, deep within you, you feel that, okay, I've hit it. When you've not hit it, you know that something is not sitting well. So there is the gut feeling, there is the instinct to let you know that, oh, wow, okay, I think I've hit this. That's when you are revising your work based on the content and based on the initial message and the inspiration that you caught. But when revising it based on accuracy, based on poetic devices, you might have to share it with other people so they can just see, okay, I think this works, but I think this is tending towards this and that. So at the end of the day, we've said that poetry is subjective, but that doesn't mean it cannot be edited by other people who are poets, or other people who appreciate poets but who may not be poets, or other people who are critics of poetry. So we can easily send them and then they can tell us what works and what doesn't work.
Thank you. Any resources that people can read online, excellent poems, links to excellent poems online? Maybe we can share that later.
Yeah, I'll check some and then I'll share it with you. Then I'll also check some classic writings.
Okay.
I'll also share it with you so that it can be.
So I can share it with everyone. Yes. Thank you.
None comes to mind immediately. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Lillian, could I have the very first slide? Oh, we will send you the copy of the slides together with the link to the recording. So within today, I'm going to work on that and send to everyone. Great work from Hankuri. Thank you for this webinar. Yes, we have Thank you so much. Really, Tony, this is helpful. Other questions on the Q&A. Who decides if a piece of writing is a poem or not? Sometimes someone would say a piece of writing is a poem, but some would say it is not. Not because the layout is like a poem. So how to know if it is a poem or just having some poetic elements and instead should be written as a paragraph?
Like I said, poetry is one of the most liberal genre of writing, right? So people can write things and claim it's a poem and all that, right? But we've shared some characteristics of a poem. If I'm to edit a poem, for instance, there are things I'm looking out for. I'm looking out for structure. I'm looking out for the music, the tonality. I'm looking out for rhythm. Then I'm looking out for rhyming. Sometimes we have rhyming schemes that are forced. We have rhyming schemes that are not forced. Then we are also looking out for things like meter. We have the iambic pentameter and stuff. Then we're also looking out for particular genres like sonnet. We're also looking out for, so if you're writing and it's 14 lines, we say, okay, this can pass for a sonnet. We're also looking out for dirges, where we sing at funeral ceremonies and stuff. So those are the things that we can use to decide. Now, one of the things, misconception over the years is poems must be condensed, complicated. You have to think too hard to get it. That's true for some genres, but that's not also true for some genres. There are lyrical poems that one read, you get it. So the fact that someone can understand it, reading it just once, does not make it a lesser poem than another, right? So we should put that in mind. Before people will say, this is too simplistic, I don't think it should. Like I've mentioned, nursery rhymes are poems, but they are quite simple and easy to understand, right? So those are the things we should also be looking out for. And when you begin, just experiment and experiment and experiment. At the end of the day, you can decide if your work is a poem or not. And that you can easily create your own niche if you consistently do something and you can defend that it's a poem after all, right? Yeah.
I remember the Dr. Seuss. So would you consider him a poet?
I'm not sure I've read Dr. Seuss. I'm not sure.
It's a very popular. He wrote several.
Writer.
Yeah. And I think those are poems. Yeah, they are wonderful children's books.
Then again, culture and tradition too matters. For instance, some of the Psalms we see, unless you go into real biblical exegesis, you may not know that that is a poem that is set in the cultural setting of the Jews or of the Israelites. Are we together? So if you come to Africa, what might pass as a poem for us, it may not necessarily be, so culture, context, they all matter. So it's very difficult to pin down things and say, this is a poem, this is not a poem. Yeah.
From the same anonymous attendee, confession that he or she gets frustrated because he couldn't understand the poem and is not so very much encouraged to continue on reading poetry because of that. So any tips for people who might find it difficult to understand and get frustrated?
Okay, so first, well, you might have to arm yourself with a theory of writing poetry. There is a theory aspect of it, right? Lots of poets, celebrated poets for that matter, they try to experiment with styles, and because of that, it becomes complex. So those kinds of poems are not written, it's like academic writing too. They are written for critiques and not necessarily for the audience, right? So one of the first steps is you may have to arm yourself with the theory of writing poems. There is the theoretical aspect of it. So you can just have a general idea of poetic devices, of dirges, of things like that. Then you may, before reading about a particular poet, you may have to also read about the context of that poet. That way, if you read more and more and more poems, you find out that the world opens up to you, and it's easy to read complex work. So it's the same for every genre. If you're not used to it at first, it's quite strange, and you may have to do some mechanical work to get there.
Yeah, it makes you, it forces you to think deeply about the words and to extract the meaning and make it understandable in your context. So yeah, that's the challenge of it. Okay, so thank you so much, Tony. Time is almost up, but from Sik Hung Chi, thank you. It's very inspiring. So it's really helpful, and we just want to appreciate you, Tony, for what you've shared today. Thank you so much. I know you have the final thoughts and comments, but any final words of encouragement to all of us as we close this webinar? Final thoughts and final encouraging words from you.
All right. I'll just repeat what I had said earlier, which is, please write.
Mm-hmm.
Your poems do not have to be perfect at first if you want to go into mainline poetry, but just write. Scribble things. Do not write because there is a project coming up. Write every day. Write every day. So that's one encouragement. And then two, do not box yourself too early. Although you may have a genre we know you with, but just try to learn about other genres, right? So that you are a master of one or a few, but a little bit of jack of all other trades, because it's not even a crime to be a jack of other trades, but a master of one or a few, right? So you can try to just try master one or two. That's my final words of encouragement.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for your interaction. Thank you for your participation. We are encouraged. And thank you for everyone who have joined us for the first time, like Sik Hung Chi, Esther, Lorena, Philip, Maria, Rosaline. Thank you. We hope to see you back and join us for our next webinar. Watch out for our announcements. I will send you invitations for our webinar next month in August. In the meantime, our final announcement would be, please pray for Lit World. Lit World is coming up, a global publishing conference that is happening this November 3 to 8 in Puebla, Mexico. Please go to our website, maiglobal.org, maiglobal.org, for more details about the publishing conference called Lit World. It happens only once every 3 years. So we would like to invite you, and please consider coming. It's kind of far. It's in Mexico, and there's, you have to buy your airfare and everything, but please look at our website, and if you're interested, please get in touch with us. Thank you so again. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We would have to say goodbye, and God bless you all. And as Tony said, keep writing. Thank you.